Hello, and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
This is our podcast about sailing the East Coast of the United States. In some episodes, we focus on passages and destinations, and in other episodes, we talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And when we come across an interesting person, we'll try to get them as a guest on the show. But before we dive into this episode, we need to say a special thank you to our supporters. Several listeners are supporting the podcast via Patreon. If you'd like to join them in supporting the podcast, you can do so by going to patreon.com/sailingtheeast.
Hey, Bela, great to see you. Yeah, totally agree. Thanks to our listeners for their support. Bela, great to see you. I'm curious, as always, who do you have lined up for us today?
Well, today we have I think, an interesting podcast. It was certainly interesting for me to talk to John Ensley. So John has been sailing since he was 11 years old and has been sharing his knowledge, experience, and passion for sailing and cruising as a professional sailing instructor since 2016. He is the owner and founder of Cruise and Learn Sailing International, where they take students on immersive sailing experiences that are a bit different from the traditional sailing schools. So sail training with John is not only educational and inspirational, but it's also a heck of a lot of fun. So we had a great conversation, and I hope you'll enjoy it.
Cool. Bela, I have a soft spot in my heart, and I'm always excited to hear about people who devote their lives to teaching others, kind of like what you and I have spent a lot of time doing, and especially in this case, are teaching people in innovative ways. So it sounds really cool. Let's get right into your interview with John Ensley.
John, hello. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Bela. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, sure. So where are you geographically?
I am currently at this moment in La Paz, Mexico, down on the southern tip of the Baja Peninsula.
Oh, very nice. And I imagine you did not fly there.
Actually, this time around, I drove down
okay.
over land because I'm going to be here for a little bit. So I wanted a vehicle here. So I drove from Washington State to here in about 4 days.
Oh, wow. Wow. So let me ask you a question. If you're at a social event, a non-sailing, so it's not cruisers, right? It's not a cruiser party, and you get introduced to somebody new, and after the introduction, they say to you, John, really nice to meet you. What do you do? How do you answer that question?
That's such a great question, and it's a little bit situational, I would say, depending on the conversation around it. But I tend to first of all kind of be direct and say, well, I'm a professional sailing instructor, or I own a sailing school. But then I'll follow that up with, I'm super passionate about helping people learn how to do long distance voyaging or cruising on 40 to 50 foot yachts.
Yeah. Oh, great. That's a nice, concise answer. So tell us a little bit about the business you started, right? It's Cruise and Learn Sailing International. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely, I'd love to. So I've been a American sailing instructor since 2016, so for about 8 years now. I've taught for a number of different schools, mostly in the Pacific Northwest and here in Mexico. And so this was kind of a development or an offshoot of my experience there. I was a ASA Outstanding Instructor of the Year, which I understand puts me in the top 1% of instructors and so forth. So it's something I have a lot of experience with, hundreds of classes literally over the last 8 years. And my specialty in particular has been multi-day liveaboard courses. So I think I heard on one of your episodes, Bela, that you had an experience with a multi-day ASA series of courses at some point. Right. And that's become quite popular. And so one of the things where Cruise and Learn Sailing International came from is there were quite often when, and I am still an ASA instructor, I should put that out there as well, and will continue to be. So I'm in no way taking anything away from the ASA program. I think it's fantastic. Right. It's how I got started almost 20 years ago. So one of the things, though, that at the end of that week, I think there were two things that I noticed in the sailing students that I was working with. And one of those was either we covered all the programs. We'd had a great immersive week of sailing, but I could sense there just wasn't confidence, right? People would actually share with me, God, I just don't think I'd go charter a boat right now, right? They just didn't have that confidence in it because it's so immersive. It's 5 days or 6 days or 7 days is a very quick progression, particularly if folks that have never maybe sailed ever before.
Right. Sure.
And so the other thing I noticed was that there's the other side of that coin, whereas that I almost felt like I gave some students a false sense of security or an overconfidence that now they have this certification, so they're just ready to go. And they go jump in with both feet. And, I literally have gotten phone calls from former students who are out on a charter boat with everything going wrong, going, what do I do? And kind of talking through whatever the scenario is, because as we all know, whatever can go wrong will go wrong at some point on a boat. So out of those two things, it just felt like there should be a way to help people build that confidence and get more experience. But I think that immersive week-long experience is super valuable, right? That immersion of day after day living it is super valuable. And so that's kind of where this concept was born, was let's provide that, right? Let's still provide that 1 week experience, but let's find a way to extend this training further. And so we call it our sailing immersion program. And essentially what we're doing is we're plugging students into a way to gain the knowledge and theory and that side of the training and take a little more time to do it and do it a little more thoroughly than I know from experience gets covered in a 5, 6, or 7 day period on a boat, right? There's just things you don't get to because you run out of time. And then so there's a few components to it. So we want to deliver that 1 week cruising experience. We want to give them a deeper access to the knowledge and the theory and really a deeper understanding of these topics. But we also want to connect people to the sailing community. So the third component kind of this immersion program is we do what we're going to call a sundowner once a week, kind of an open Zoom call where any of our students can plug in. We'll have guest speakers, expert speakers. We'll probably turn that into a podcast at some point. But it's a place where as they're working through some of this course material, they can ask questions, they can say, hey, I didn't really get this part. And then they have a live instructor on the line to kind of walk through questions and do that sort of thing. And then another component of it is opportunities to sail locally. So this is going to be kind of confined to our geography, but we have some big plans in mind to continue to kind of expand this into new markets. Right now we're in the Pacific Northwest primarily. But being able to utilize relationships with private boat owners, with sailing clubs, and get people out on boats. So every week there'll be opportunities for local students to just come out and jump on a boat in a group of 3 or 4, and maybe local races, right? Whatever it is, just so they can get out on the water, gain that experience. And sort of the idea with all this is that then it all culminates at a certain period during their it's a 12-month program is the way we kind of designed it. So it all kind of culminates with that 1 week immersive cruise and learn sailing experience.
Got it. So I think what I understand from what you just said is that this is a much longer experience, and it involves getting me some good hands-on experience and some theoretical book knowledge before I take my 1 week immersive course.
Yes, that would be the idea, is that you get a certain amount of the way through the material before you actually go on that course. You could book it right away, but we want to push that out and give you some time to gain some experience and gain that knowledge. So the other side of this is, of course, we wanted to make this affordable and accessible. So, we looked at, in my experience, what people are paying to go on a 1 week certification program. And we said, okay, well, we still want to provide that, but how can we make it affordable and get these other value adds in there? And so we kind of built it out. And then we struck on the idea, well, people are really used to subscription type programs online with a lot of things. So we said, well, let's take that cost that people are typically paying for a 1 week cruise and learn, split that up over 12 months into some smaller manageable payments, and still provide these extra value adds.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
the final piece, is let's make this accessible to as many people as we can.
Yeah. You know, I can really identify with what you're saying, because I'm remembering when we took our ASA 1 week, 7-day immersive course, my wife and I, there was a total of 3 of us, 3 students on the boat, my wife and I, who we've had a Catalina 22 for many years. I certainly did a lot of sailing on that, you know, on lakes and things like that. So I sort of knew what a jib was, and I knew what a mainsail was, and I sort of
Right.
understood, you know, how the boat's supposed to behave and stuff. And the 3rd student who was on the boat on that course had never sailed in their life. And I could often see that they felt totally overwhelmed with what was going on, right? I mean, they were just sort of getting used to the boat heeling over.
Right, exactly.
Right. So like, what is this, right? And so I think this notion of giving people some of that basic sort of knowledge and comfort of doing these things, and the confidence that comes along with that, I think really prepares you much better for that sort of 1 week immersive course. That's great.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's a good concept, and I hope it you know, other people think it's a good concept, obviously. So there's another component of this too that I think is super important, and that is I've taught ASA courses for a long time, and will continue to do that. But that curriculum isn't necessarily conducive to the system that I'm trying to put in place. So I went looking for some other things, and I ran across Nautic Ed, and they've been around since about 2008, I believe. And they have I knew of them before, but didn't know a lot about them until you know, more recently. They have a very comprehensive multimedia online training platform for the knowledge and theory that is quite conducive to a you know, work at your own pace, but take some time to work through the material. And it gets it done in a very thorough way with online exams and things like that. It's all automated. And as I dug more into that program, you know, I found out that you know, their certifications are internationally recognized. They are recognized by the U.S. Coast Guard as one of the only sail training companies, the only sail training company in the United States that meets the American standards for sail training that was adopted by the Coast Guard in 2017.
Wow.
So their system of assessments and so forth so anyway, this program is far more robust than I had imagined. And it actually works perfectly with the sailing immersion program concept. And so we've adopted that platform, and we are offering the Nautic Ed certifications and assessments and that training platform that it ties in. The other thing Nautic Ed introduced us to that I think is just phenomenal, particularly for those folks that are not in our local area, is a virtual reality sail training platform. And that sounded bizarre to me at first, but I've actually gotten on and used it, and it is pretty amazing. You know, some of the skills and the insights you can get. You know, when Nautic Ed's developed a virtual reality docking training where you're actually, you know, on the boat in virtual reality, doing a Mediterranean mooring and doing a, you know, backing in and springing on and off, and you know, they've got it all dialed in there. It's really pretty amazing, and it gives us the opportunity for those students that are outside our local area right now to be able to train before they get there for their 1 week, you know, cruising adventure. So so Nautic Ed's been real instrumental to kind of filling in the gaps and putting this program together completely.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So if I called you up and I said, hey, I'm interested in signing up for one of your courses, take me through what that process is like, you know, what questions you're going to ask me and what questions I should be asking you.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the number one question I would have to ask is, you know, why are you interested in learning how to sail, right? What are you going to do? Do you want to, is it just a bucket list thing where you want to check a box? Do you want to go be able to charter boats? Do you want to buy a boat and take off, sail around the world someday? Or, you know, what do you want to do? What's the application? Because that's really what will give me some idea what direction to point someone, and in terms of which program is the best fit for them. So that's really the first thing is, what's your objective? What do you want to do?
Yep.
and then we can move you down a pathway to what you
Sure.
want.
So let's say that, my short-term goal is to know how to sail. I've never sailed in my life before. And then my sort of end goal, hopefully in a year or 2 or 3, is to buy myself a nice cruising boat and go coastal cruising on it. So let's say that's my response to your question. Take me down to those next steps in the conversation.
Absolutely. So the first thing is probably to get some knowledge, get some basic knowledge. And we do that we have 2 free online sailing courses that anybody can sign up for. And so you can get a taste of that online platform, a taste of some of the terminology, and that'll give you a pretty good idea where, I don't want to do this, right? This is too much. A lot of times there's more information than people realize, right, to sailing. And so that's a good way to get your feet wet, so to speak. And then I think that the progression there is, if that seems like something that's going to work for you, is we get you enrolled in the sailing immersion program. I'm going to assume you're in my area there in the Pacific Northwest. And one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, next week I've got a group of 3. You can be the 4th. We're going to go out on a 21-foot sailboat on the Columbia River, and you should get on that boat, right? And get out on the water, experience what it's like, and then move you through that program. So I think that's how I would approach it if you ask me the question that way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So are there various? It's not clear to me in talking about what your offerings are. Are there various different paths through the program?
There are, and so the somebody that's in my local area in the Puget Sound, right? That path is the immersion program. And really the difference between that and the second option is that you're outside the local area. So I can't really take you out day sailing next week, right? That's because that's not viable, at least until I open in your city, right? Yep. And so that's the first path, the sailing immersion program. The second path is exactly the same, except we don't have the day sailing racing opportunities. I'm still going to network with local sailing organizations in your area and plug you into them to try and get you out on the water that way. But so the difference there is you're going to get the online training, you're going to get the virtual reality training, you're going to get access to the sundowners on every week on Friday, you're going to get access to the Facebook groups and the local networking. And then you book your 1-week cruise and learn, and you're going to come out and spend a week with us, whether that's in the Pacific Northwest or Mexico, or we have some options there.
Okay, great. So, and all of this hopefully concludes in me getting a Nautic Ed certification.
Correct. That's the idea. You still get a certification at the end of the day, and it's an internationally recognized certification. You're going to be able to go, to get the SLC part of it. You're going to be able to go to the Mediterranean, which is a big topic because you have to have that UN Resolution 40 ICC or an equivalent, and Nautic Ed's SLC more than meets that guideline and is recognized by all the Mediterranean charter companies and governments for that matter.
Right.
So that you have that box covered. And so there's really a third pathway here too as well that I don't want to overlook. And that is, I'm still an ASA instructor. I have relationships with ASA schools. So for that person who says, okay, it all sounds great, but I just don't want to put that kind of effort, right? I want to do this in a week, get a certification, and be done. So we can still make that happen as well. We can do the 7-day cruise and learn ASA curriculum through one of our partner schools, and still, make that kind of traditional approach still work for somebody.
Yeah. I remember in sort of my sailing journey, taking my ASA week-long course, getting my certification, feeling really good about it, getting a boat, going out on friends' boats, for day sails and stuff, coastal cruising, maybe a week of sailing, but anchoring every night. And then I did my first 3-day passage, right? 3 days and 3 nights. Sailing 24 hours a day. And that was like, and I had no course in that, right? That was just like, and it was like totally different. And the first night was kind of overwhelming when I'm on watch by myself. It's dark.
Yeah, night sailing's a different ball game, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was like a huge step, and it's not a step for everyone. Not everyone's interested in that, but people who want to do longer passages clearly need to do that. Is there that type of experience in your course?
There is, and so we call that our advanced sail training immersion program. And what we really do is we add a second year to the immersion program, another 1 week cruise and learn. But we add in the advanced courses. So then the Nautic Ed system has a system of ranks, and different courses are bundled with different ranks. And so what most people are going to go for is what's called the Bareboat Charter Master rank. And that's a bundle of 9 courses that they complete to get to that point. Plus there's an on the water requirement. One of the unique things they do is an electronic logbook, and you have to have 50 days of on the water time to actually get the certification at the end, which I think is a great thing.
Wow. Yeah.
And they've made it pretty easy. They have a couple of different apps that actually track your GPS. When it asks you if you're on the water, are you sailing? You hit yes, and it automatically goes in your logbook.
Oh, wow.
They have another one what's called crewmates, where you can set different people up. And so if you and I go sailing, Bela, we come back and I send you an email with a link, and that email says, Bela, John says he went sailing with you. You click the link and confirm that I did, and it automatically goes in my logbook. And if you're a Nautic Ed member, it goes in your logbook too. So a few things like that to make it pretty easy to log your sailing time. And then of course you can also manually enter time you have. And so there's that requirement. So what we do with the Nautic Ed side of things is we add the captain rank, which is the next one after bareboat, which is 12 courses. So we add those additional 3 or 4 courses and another 1 week, which will include a night operation. So in ASA world, that's the 106 Advanced Coastal Cruising course. And so again, that's also available through our partner schools. So we can connect people to that more overnight distance cruising type training.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I still remember that vividly. Like, that was like, oh my gosh, I'm totally ill prepared for this.
Yes. Lights flashing everywhere. Is that a street light or is that a navigation light?
Right. Very, yes. And, I grew up sailing on a lake, a pretty good sized lake. And so I rarely went out at night because the lights were so confusing. And because there's a lot of stuff on shore, and the lake was, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 miles wide at its widest. So there's lights all over the place. And even on that small lake that I knew really well, because I spent a lot of time on it, boy, I would get disoriented at night. And then, going out 10 miles offshore, it's amazing how many lights were out there. And, is that a buoy? Is that a boat? Is the boat moving? Is it not moving? All those types of things were, even though I read about them in books, experiencing, at least for me, was like a huge thing. And I think this notion of people who want to do that at some point in time really should go out with someone like you or the ASA coastal cruising course, because man, that is a valuable experience.
It sure is. And it really reinforces how important those tools are, whether it's paper charts, electronic charts, those kinds of things become very important at night, because you really got to keep track of those things. And I think having that experience with someone who has experience is super, a less stressful way, let's say, to learn.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing how much more disciplined I am, and I need to be at night versus the day.
Yeah, for sure. That insecurity of running into something that you can't see is a little bit terrifying, right?
Yes it is. That's great. So tell me a little bit about the various different vessels that people might use if they come for that 1 week, sort of the end of the course, and when you go out for a week.
Absolutely. So our primary sailing vessel up in the Pacific Northwest is a Jeanneau 45.2. Boat name is Puelche, and which is a friend of mine is the previous owner. I purchased Puelche. He's Chilean, and Puelche is the wind that blows out of the Andes. If anybody wants to know where that name came from. And so that's the boat we use in the San Juan Islands, Puget Sound, British Columbia, that area. I have a partner school, Go Baja Sailing, down in La Paz, Mexico, where I'm at right now. And so we have a Dufour 455, 4-cabin Dufour 455 that we run here in La Paz in the Sea of Cortez, as well as a Jeanneau 44, 3-cabin Jeanneau 44. So those are the two monohull options. And then we have a Fontaine Pajot, a 4-cabin Fontaine Pajot 44 catamaran that we run the catamaran courses on, as well as a Lagoon 38, a 3-cabin Lagoon 38. So those are the primary training vessels. And then of course, the charter world, really, we can go any place somebody wants to go. We can arrange a charter boat and do courses in the Virgin Islands, in the Bahamas.
Got it. So are the catamarans in just in La Paz, or are they also?
They are just in La Paz. So all our catamaran experience would be here in La Paz, as opposed to up in the Pacific Northwest. For whatever reason, catamarans aren't super common in the Pacific Northwest. So it's there's probably an opportunity for some sailors in the Northwest to come down and actually pick up those catamaran certifications, because they're few and far between up there.
Yeah, very nice. So tell me a little bit about the difference between those certifications for a cat versus a monohull.
So in the ASA world, the catamaran certification is a 114, an ASA 114. And it's very similar to the other ASA classes. There's quite an overlap, obviously, because most of the sailing skills and a lot of the terminology overlaps between the two. So I would say the course really focuses on the differences between monohulls and catamarans. And so, it talks about two widely spaced holes as opposed to a deep keel and so forth. And so it really just introduces students to those differences. And I think one of the big things with the catamaran training is twin engines and maneuvering under power with reverse propulsion and so forth. That's a new skill for a lot of sailors if they haven't done that before, or they don't have powerboat experience. So it focuses a good bit on that. On the Nautic Ed side, it's similar. It's an endorsement or an additional certification that you add on. So there's some coursework, and then of course some on the water requirements as well.
Got it. Got it. And let's say I called you up and said, I don't know if I want to do a monohull or a cat. What advice would you give me?
Well, again, I'm going to start asking you some questions, right? Like, what do you want to do? What are you planning to go charter? Or are you planning to buy a boat and you're not sure whether you want a catamaran or a monohull? I think the path of least resistance for sure is to jump on a monohull course, because you're going to learn the sailing skills. You're going to learn the terminology, and that will be transferable should you decide to then jump on a catamaran and see if you like catamarans. Those skills will all be transferable. So I think you can't go wrong with a series on the monohull course and then add the catamaran later if you're not sure.
Yeah, that makes great amount of sense. So, there's a fair number of small companies, I'll say, that are offering these various week-long courses. Many of them are not affiliated with ASA or Nautic Ed, but they'll take you out on a long passage for a week. And some of them have sort of structured programs, some of them less so. Can you just talk a little bit about the pluses and minuses of those as compared to what you guys are doing?
Sure. So I think anytime you can get out on the water with an experienced sailor, that's a good experience, right? Even if it's a bad experience, it's a good experience. So you're going to learn something on that trip. So I don't want to take anything away from that, because I think that is a good thing. But I think there's also a value to having a recognized certification system. It creates a standard. So that the instruction covered a certain standard of material and knowledge in the right way, right? So I think that's important. And then from a practical standpoint, I mentioned Resolution 40, UN Resolution 40 in Europe. The charter companies in Europe, they want to see that you have these equivalent trainings. And so some sort of certification system is usually going to be required. They're also going to want to see a sailing resume. But they're going to want to see that you have these equivalents. The other area people don't often think about, particularly if they're going to buy a boat, is insurance. Quite often having an official recognized certification as sail training will make a difference in your insurance rates or your ability to get insurance on your new boat. So those are some good reasons to use a certification system that's established some kind of standard, as opposed to jumping on a boat with somebody for a week. I mean, you're going to learn a lot both ways, but I think you come out of the certification experience with something that that you can put on the wall, so to speak, and point to.
Right. It has residual value, or currency, if you want to call it that, right? To be able to enable you to do thing. It enables you to do things because people will allow you to do those things.
Yes. I take people out sailing with me, and they learn for sure, but it's not the same as taking people out on a class, right? I approach those two things very differently. Yeah.
So if I'm thinking of taking let's say I'm thinking about getting into sailing, and I'm not sure if I'm going to do ASA. I'm not sure if I'm going to come do your thing. I'm not sure. So I'm going to call up a bunch of different places. I'm going to call up you. I'm going to call up some ASA schools. What type of questions should I be asking? What are the, sort of red flags? If they say this, be aware. What's some advice you can give us there?
Yeah, for sure. So ask them what type of certification system they're running, right? Whether they're on ASA or US Sailing or Nautic Ed or whoever it is. There's a number of them out there. RYA is available in a handful of places, right? There's a lot of different systems out there. So find out what system they're using. But I think I would also ask a lot of questions about the instructors. Who's teaching the classes? How long have they been around? So some questions about instructors I think are good. Consulting online reviews, I think, is super important. See what students have said. In today's world, online reviews, I think you kind of have to approach those a little cautiously because there's all kinds of crazy things that get put on reviews. But it should be one factor. And then I think cost, obviously, you want to compare some costs and see what is an economical approach to this, and understanding that you often get what you pay for. And then I think having worked with a lot of different schools, I think the biggest thing complaints have come up is people don't expect the quality of the vessel that's particularly on the multi-day courses, right? So you show up and you get on the boat, and it's maybe not the Shangri-La that you were expecting. And so I'd be asking a lot of questions about what are the boats, how are they maintained, some of those types of questions, just to give yourself some idea, and then watch for the response. Anybody that spent time on boats knows that a lot goes wrong on boats, even when they're new, right? So if you get this response that says, "Oh, our boats are absolutely perfect," it's something I'd be starting to be a little cautious, because that's likely not the case. So those are some of the questions I would ask. What are the boats like? What are the instructors like? Where do the prices compare? What are the online reviews? That kind of thing.
Yeah, perfect. So let's talk a little bit about cost. Can you sort of give us a rough idea of what it costs to take your various different offerings?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do, again, we've taken that cost that people typically pay for a 1-week trip, and we've kind of divided that up over 12 months. And so the way we work it is it's $399 a month for a single sailor, or $599 for what I call a pair of sailors rather than a couple, for a pair of sailors. And so that includes everything we've talked about today. The 1-week trip sometime during that period, all the certifications on the Nautic Ed platform, the sundowner meetings, the day sailing if you're in my local area. It includes all of that. The out of my area program is the same, except it drops by about $100 because we can't offer the day sailing opportunities. And then we also offer a pay in full. So if you just want to pay in full with a 10% discount. So that's the way we approach it. So you have both of those options.
Very nice. Very nice. That's reasonable, right? Because the ASA course is, the 7-day ASA or 5-day ASA course, depends on, some schools do it in 7, some do it in 5.
Mhm.
They're up there in cost. So
They are.
that
Yeah.
sounds pretty good. Yeah. I really like this notion of sort of this year-long experience, giving me little bits and bytes here and there, letting me assimilate it, let me bring it into practice, get me comfortable with it, and then doing the immersive thing. I think that's a great way of doing that, John. My hat's off
And
to you.
and as an instructor, it makes me feel better about sending students out that I feel like are competent, right?
Right.
That they've taken the time to actually learn it and experience it, and I'm sending them out to charter that boat or whatever it is with a level of competence that I sometimes have not felt in the past.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's your reputation, right? That's sort of on the line there. Right.
Yes, exactly.
And, the last thing you want to have happen is, one of the big charter companies saying, no, we don't accept the certifications from that place.
Right. Who certified you? Right.
Right. Right. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Hey, so are there questions I haven't asked you that I should have?
You've asked some great questions. We've had a good conversation. I think the final piece of this is we've talked a little about pricing and affordability, but and on my site I kind of break down like what would you actually have to spend to do all this. Like if you took a 1-week course, you joined a local sailing club so you could do day sailing. You pieced all these pieces together. And I think, it's a significant cost, as you alluded to a moment ago. Just the 1 week is pretty close to what our annual cost is, let alone the sailing clubs or the day sailing or racing opportunities or some of these other things. And I don't even know how to put a cost on like the sundowner meetings where you can ask questions and interact with your sailors, right? I don't know what the cost of that is, but it's super valuable. I know that. So, I think maybe that's the comparison there. And if you're putting your toes in the water and you're not sure the sailing thing's for you, that might be a great approach. You could cancel anytime, right? So you could get 3 months in and go, nope, I don't really want to do this anymore.
Right.
And pull the plug, and you haven't spent $6,000 or $8,000 or $10,000 on a week-long trip in Mexico.
Right. And also those, week-long courses or trips, it's hard to get off halfway through.
Yeah, yes, it is.
You're sort of committed. You're
sort of stuck there. Yes.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
So it's good to know that it's really something you want to do, and it may stretch you, but at the same time, you're confident that that's something you want to do because you have some experience.
The key question I like to ask people if they're kind of unsure is your goal to get a certification and a sticker in a book, or is your goal to actually learn and know what you're doing? Right? Because there's two different paths there that can get you both places, frankly. But if you really want to gain the knowledge and understanding and confidence and competence, that's the word we really like to focus on, is competence. Then I think what we offer is pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, sounds great. So, John, where's the best place for people to find you?
So, cruiseandlearnsailing.com would be the place to start, and that's the word cruise, the letter N, sailing.com.
Okay, I will make sure that's in the show notes so people can find that.
So there's a couple of things there. You can sign up for those 2 free courses I mentioned. There's several landing pages for that. Our email, our phone number, all about us is on there. So that would be the place to go.
Super. Hey, John, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Likewise, Bela. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been, you're right, it's been a great conversation.
Bela, that was indeed a really interesting change of pace and a great interview. I really love how John took the idea of changing the accessibility of learning how to sail, both from kind of a timing perspective and shifting this time where you're learning how to sail, and also a financial perspective from a business model standpoint, and really built a different way to learn to sail. What were your big takeaways?
Yeah, as I was talking to him, I reflected back on the week-long course that Elaine and I took, the Learn How to Sail course. It was an American Sailing Association course, and it was 101, 102, and 104, which are various different, sounds like a college education course numbering system. And it was a week-long course where we went on a boat and we stayed on the boat for a week. And it was Elaine and I, and there was a third student. And the third student had never sailed before in their life. And it got me thinking about this notion of cramming all of that stuff into 5 days. And even though I had sailed a fair amount, had been sailing for 20 years, not on a big boat, but small on a small lake. And for me, it was still like drinking water from a fire hose. It was just a lot of information, a lot of stuff to learn and kind of assimilate. And I'm not the brightest bulb in the drawer, so it takes me a while to kind of learn these things. And then I was thinking about, gosh, this poor other person that's with us, they don't even know port and starboard. They don't know right and left, and for them it must even be more challenging. So I think that's what John has tried to tackle, where he kind of, the culmination of his school is the week-long trip. And you do these smaller couple-hour lessons kind of locally, and you learn and you kind of get to assimilate, you get to practice, you become familiar, so that when you take that week-long trip and you're staying on the boat, you learn so much more. It's just like, it's like when you read a book, the first time you read a book, you get a certain amount out of it, but I often get more out of the book the second or third time I read it, because it's for my brain, it's had time to kind of sink in. And I think that's one of the really cool things that John has done here, is that he has this sort of structured program that gets you to go out to sail, get some lessons at the local level, and then the kind of the end of the thing is this week-long trip, which I think was a really, really cool way of doing it. What kind of struck you as the non-sailor? What kind of struck you, Mike?
I again, like I said in the opening half too, I love the idea of rethinking the process. And then he talked a lot about technology, and I've been thinking and learning and writing about technology and learning for almost 30 years now. And John talked a little bit about online learning and virtual reality and working that into the system. But let me pick your brain a little bit on this. So how do you see some of these newer technologies impacting how people can learn to sail or improve their sailing knowledge and skills? I mean, at the end of the day, you're on a boat with the wind and the water and everything's moving and it's loud and you're healing and all these things like you were talking about in the interview. What is the right role that you see for technology in the learning process?
So that's a great question. I think if we look at aviation, flight simulation has been used for years and years and years. And where they put a pilot inside of this box and it's all screen projections, and they can move the box around so it feels like you have turbulence. So it's a fully immersive experience. And I think that has been shown to work very, very well, because you can put people in situations that are extremely dangerous if it was a real airplane, but they're not, because you're inside of this box in a room. So that I think works really, really well. And at the other end of the spectrum, I'll just use a simple example, watching YouTube videos, for me is a great way to learn. I have learned how to fix a lot of things and make a lot of things out of wood and stuff like that by watching YouTube videos. But that's sort of a one-dimensional, you're just sort of watching. And, again, you have to have some level. I find for myself, I have to have some level of knowledge about what the video was talking about and trying to explain, and for me to sort of really learn from it, I have to have some baseline set of knowledge. The whole notion of virtual reality glasses and all of these things, I really don't know. I think there's some value in that, but I think we have to be careful in thinking that it's the same as actually going out to sail. I mean, it's still, these flight simulators I talk about in the aviation industry, those things are multi-million-dollar machines and systems. And they're extremely sophisticated. And if we put you in one, you would probably think you're on a real airplane, because it's got the sound, it's got the motion, it's got all of that stuff. It's doing all of the senses, right? And these sailing, like flying, is a multi-sensory experience. So the question is, how close can we get to stimulating all of your senses? Because the input you get from all of your senses is important in that sort of learning process and ability to sail and know what's going on. So I don't know. That's sort of my 2 cents on that. I mean, you've been an educator for a long time. What do you think, Mike?
I mean, I agree with you. I think your analogy to learning how to pilot an airplane is really apt here. And I think, again, from 2 standpoints. One is that you kind of sensitize people to the feelings and what they're going to see is really great from a basic standpoint. So before you get on board a ship where there's dangerous and it's expensive, to do that first in a safe and simulated environment is great. And then, like you said, this idea of putting people in stressful, real situations to help train them the proper response in dangerous conditions or an emergency is also fantastic. So I love the idea of VR or some sort of immersion. Like what you're talking about, it's really good for learning. I'm doing a lot of work right now on figuring out how to integrate some of these, virtual and augmented reality technologies into the learning experiences for students in business, and even, thinking about putting somebody in a boardroom to see how it looks and feels. It's one thing to watch a flat video on YouTube, right? And it's another thing to really feel like you're sitting in the boardroom itself.
Right.
So I really think that that this kind of technology can really help. And at the end of the day, yeah, sailing is pleasurable, like a lot of things in life. I mean, I think for driving a car, it's the same way. Sailing a car should be fun and enjoyable, but you also have people's lives at risk. There's a lot of money at stake, right? And I think we're way too lax, even with teaching people to drive cars these days, right? That we give anybody pretty much a driver's license, and you can do a lot of damage going 120 miles an hour with a vehicle that weighs 2,000 pounds, right, or whatever they weigh these days, right? So I love the idea of using technology for this. And again, I even think too, we probably don't do enough in all areas of life. Like, there's so much, we've talked about continuing education on this podcast before, that I think to operate any kind of vehicle, it's important to have continuing education to refresh people's skills. And technology is a fairly inexpensive and open way that people can access knowledge, information, and practice. So I'm all for anything that we can do to help improve people's skills, to keep people safe, to give people a chance to be included and involved. We should try to do that. So
right. And as you were saying that, Mike, it got me thinking that there's, in a lot of these endeavors, sailing, flying, driving a car, there's sort of 2 parts to it. Like if I'm trying to figure out how to sail my boat from point A to point B, there's a part of that I'm doing at a desk, right? I don't need the boat. I can do that anywhere. I can do that in my office. I need a map, and I need to figure out the distance and what the tides and the currents are, et cetera. And those things are, that's all bookwork. That's not a multi-sensory experience. There's the actual doing it, which is the multi-sensory experience. So you can certainly take a lot of these types of lessons and break them down in those 2 branches of the tree. There's a bunch of stuff that you can do in preparation for the actual experience. And those things that you can do in preparation for are often, I'll describe as book learning, right? You can do them at a desk. You don't need the boat. You don't need the equipment. So anyway, that was just another thought I wanted to throw in there.
Yeah, pick the right tool to train in the right environment that's similar to what you're dealing with in the real world, So it's like, yeah, you don't need to give somebody a $3,000 Apple Vision Pro headset to do something that you can do on a spreadsheet, right? But for the actual sailing part, sure, it might make sense to throw some money at some of these things, especially keeping people's skills upgraded. With driving too, if you haven't driven a car in a year or 2 years, it might be good to sharpen up the skills, right? Or same with a boat, right? You haven't been on a boat all year. You know what? Let's sharpen these things up. Usually there's muscle memory and things like this, but why not? If you have the technology and it doesn't cost anything, right, to let another person use it. Every marina has this. Yeah, sure. Come and get your stamp, and maybe we give you a discount on your insurance, right? There's an incentive. Maybe it's not like you must get recertified every 3 years, but maybe it's something that, we give you 2% discount if you do this, in the beginning. So things like that, I think, are cool. And we can incentivize people to use the tools to learn and to practice. Again, you're selling a new GPS system, right? And maybe what's the next generation of technology, and you want to train people on that. All kinds of cool stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
But hey,
yeah.
I have one last question for you, Bela.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about teaching sailing? Because I think you'd be great at it. I mean, people maybe don't know this, but I think it's been about 8 or 9 or 10 years now, but we actually would teach in the classroom together a little bit. And you're always really good with the students. And talking about teaching sailing led me to believe, hey, as you kind of wind down your skiing career and, the weather might get bad for fishing, have you ever thought about being a sailing teacher?
I never have. It's one of those things that never really struck me as I used to teach skiing. I taught skiing for a while when I was in college, and here was my reason I didn't pursue that further. I found myself teaching people to do something that they really didn't want to learn how to do, and they were doing it either for a friend, or their parents put them into the class, or their girlfriend or their boyfriend skis, so they wanted to learn how to ski, but they really didn't want to learn how to ski. so there was people who were there who weren't there because they wanted to be. And that's one of the things I enjoyed about college. Most of the college students are there by choice, particularly at the graduate level, which is most of the teaching I did. So they're motivated for the most part, and they want to learn. And I don't know how sailing would be. It would be interesting. So I don't know the answer to that. I've never really thought about it. Interestingly enough, my son Andy taught sailing for a while. There's a big fancy resort up on Lake George, and for about 5 or 6 years they had a sailing school there, part of the offshore sailing school franchise, and Andy taught sailing there, and he seemed to enjoy that. But I think that I'm not looking to start many new endeavors at this point, Mike. So,
fair enough. Well, what do you think?
Yeah.
Should we wrap this one up?
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
All right, listeners, thanks for joining us for yet another episode. We hope you found our conversation interesting and thought-provoking. If you have questions about what we've discussed, as always, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
And if you enjoyed the podcast, please hit that follow button in your podcasting application. Help spread the word about the podcast. Tell your friends and acquaintances who might enjoy listening to this. And if you feel up to it, leave us a review. And if you know of someone that would make a good guest for the show, let us know, and we'll reach out to them and see if they'd be interested in being on the podcast. Hope to see you all out there soon. Springtime is here, and the boat's uncovered. The hull has been waxed, and it will be going in the water in a few weeks. We're recording this podcast on April 11th. The boat is scheduled to go into the water the first week in May. So I think by the time you hear this, the boat will be in the water. So see you all soon.
Very exciting. Yeah, very exciting, Bela. Good luck with that. And from over here in Münster, Germany, we'll see everybody next time.
Okay, stop.